picture yourself in the year 1873. You're aboard a modest fishing vessel, swaying on the dark Atlantic swells, only about 2 kilometers from Cornwall's coastline in England. In front of you, a gray granite tower as high as a 12-story structure rises out of a group of jagged black rocks. That's the Longships Lighthouse, and you were just about to see why mariners of that era described a night there as being devoured alive by the ocean. Naturally, the wind hits your face with astonishing, almost staggering power. The swells rolling in from the open sea keep their full momentum until they slam into the rock formation known as Longships. For hundreds of years, this collection of tiny islands had a reputation as a graveyard for ships. No one understood that better than the people living nearby. That stretch of coastline had a brutal, long history of maritime disasters. Across generations, that entire family made a living by picking through the debris the ocean carried ashore, a custom called wrecking. The reef created by Longships islets had wrecked countless vessels over the centuries. Just take a moment to consider that. How could anyone construct a lighthouse on rocks that almost disappear when the tide comes in, with some of Europe's roughest waters all around? And even tougher question, how could a person stay there alone for weeks as the sea tried to pull the structure apart, brick by brick? That's the central question behind everything you're about to learn next. The answer is far from straightforward. It's about to expose a little-known truth regarding the engineering, bravery, and almost insanity needed to maintain a shining beacon in such a remote spot. Prior to the present tower, a shorter, earlier one stood here, constructed around the mid-1500s. Back then, it looked like an ideal fix, yet one major flaw had been completely overlooked. During storms, the sea surged so high that the entire base of the old lighthouse ended up submerged. Rather than steering vessels to safety, the lighthouse beam stayed concealed behind towering waves. Even though the lighthouse was strongly constructed and the ocean was savage, its short stature caused the beam to be blocked by heavy waves, making the signal erratic. So, the very structure intended to rescue sailors ended up, ironically, misleading them on the stormiest nights, exactly when survival depended on it. Pause for a moment and picture this. A ship loaded with cargo and people is helmed by its captain as he battles through a raging Atlantic storm. He scans the horizon for any glimmer that ought to reveal the location of the hazard. However, the churning and furious sea engulfs the beacon for moments that feel endless. During those dark gaps, choices had to be made, and frequently those choices proved fatal. This exact issue prompted Trinity House, the authority in charge of the UK's lighthouses, to take an extreme step. Their plan was to tear down a piece of history and erect an entirely fresh tower alongside the original. The new structure was higher and more robust, able to dominate the ocean rather than shy away from it. The engineer selected for this undertaking was James Douglas, the very person behind Wolf Rock, another renowned lighthouse nearby. Designed by Sir James Douglas, the tower was erected in 1873, with construction guided by him from 1869 to 1873. What happens next is something hardly anyone pictures. Constructing this beacon wasn't simply about stacking blocks of rock. It represented an authentic battle between man-made skill and nature's harsh power in the most unforgiving settings one could think of. To grasp how immense the task was, picture the construction site itself. No beach existed, no port, no stable land. Only a heap of stones remained, slammed by surf round the clock. It lay so far offshore that a single error could literally pull you down to the seafloor. To await the low tide, the workers needed to be ferried by boat. Once a brief opportunity arose, they hurried against time to build, block by block, a granite tower strong enough to endure hurricanes. Gak shok uk uk. The blocks employed in the construction were no standard bricks. These were solid granite blocks, carved and joined in a wedge shape, similar to huge jigsaw puzzle pieces. When the waves hit the tower, They drove the stones deeper into one another rather than collapsing them. This resembles piling plastic cups at random, which a light breeze can knock over, in contrast to perfectly aligned Lego bricks that stay firm when stressed. The granite joining method also recycled tools and know-how from the Wolfrock Lighthouse project, itself an icon of British Victorian engineering. Upon its completion and lighting near the end of December 1873, the final structure impressed observers of that era. With walls made of interlocking granite blocks, the new tower rose to a height of 117 feet, roughly 35 meters. A lantern sat at the summit, incorporating an exceptional optical system produced by the Chance Brothers Company in Birmingham. During that period, the Chance Brothers Company from Birmingham was viewed as one of the world's biggest producers of lighthouse lenses. The illumination came from an oil lamp with 8 wicks, specifically the Douglas model. It operated on a mixture of canola seed oil, and antimatter feed oil. Reflect on the contrast. Places like London already had gas lamps and early traces of electric lighting appearing in their richer neighborhoods. Out in the middle of the sea, a man was required to hand-light 8 small, vegetable oil-fed wicks nightly. This took place in a remote room that was pounded by gales exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. Advanced innovation and old-fashioned simplicity came together in that single building on that same night, all dedicated to the vital job of keeping the lamp burning. And this is where the narrative picks up an extra dimension seldom covered in documentaries. One might assume that residing in a lighthouse like this would be a calm, isolated existence. The truth was far harsher and, at the same time, more sophisticated than it appears. Lighthouses such as Longships were staffed by rotating teams of keepers who worked shifts lasting several weeks. One group remained trapped inside the tower, dealing with monotony, freezing temperatures, and complete seclusion. A second group lived onshore in homes constructed specifically for the keepers' families near Sennin Cove. The keepers' families occupied a row of houses. Because the lighthouse was clearly visible from the houses, the wives could send messages to their husbands using signal flags. Hold on for a moment and picture this in your mind. A woman stands at the window of her seaside home, raising colorful flags arranged in a pre-arranged code. Amid the fog and wind, she tries to reach her husband, who is miles away. Her signal might say that the children are healthy, or that she needs more supplies. There were no phones and no dependable radios, just colored cloth, and the hope that the wind wouldn't distort the message. Life within the tower also had its own survival rules. In January 1901, more than 20 years after the new tower opened, an extremely severe storm hit the area. For days on end, supply boats were unable to reach the lighthouse. On the mainland, people began to worry that the keepers could be starving. When they were finally reached, something unusual was found. They had plenty of food. The only genuine hardship for the men was going without tobacco. They had resorted to smoking coffee, hops, and tea leaves instead of their usual tobacco. Something immense about human creativity comes to light through this small detail. Even while cut off and missing the item they viewed as vital for everyday comfort, the lighthouse keepers refused to lose hope. They made do with what was on hand, testing other options and adjusting what they could use. This is exactly how polar explorers operate, how prisoners of war cope, and how anyone forced into extreme situations responds. When the perfect option doesn't exist, the mind goes with what is actually possible. Yet not every chapter of Longship's story involved peaceful adjustment. In that place, the ocean always got the last word. Even after the new tower went up, despite all the advanced engineering of that era, the sea kept charging its toll. Back in 1898, on a single night, the steamship SS Bluejacket slammed into the rocks by the lighthouse. The historical record says the evening was perfectly clear, with no storm to use as an excuse. On that cloudless night, the ship was wrecked against the boulders near the lighthouse, nearly taking out both the tower itself and the entire operation. Give that a moment of thought. It wasn't a raging storm that nearly ruined decades of painstaking engineering work. Instead, it was a basic navigational slip made when visibility was flawless. An official British maritime inquiry ruled that a lack of good judgment was to blame. The fault lay with the captain, and his license was taken away for 6 months. In short, even with the best equipment available then, and a light standing more than 30 meters high to guide ships, human error was still there. It proved the most unpredictable element in the entire scenario. This is where the romantic image of the solitary, heroic lighthouse single-handedly overcoming nature has to be revised. Longships was never simply an engineering victory over the sea. In reality, it was an ongoing and never-ending battle where every technological breakthrough came with a fresh kind of setback. Moreover, every fix introduced another issue that needed resolving. Over the years, the seemingly flawless light kept being swapped out and upgraded time and again. Petroleum steam systems took over from oil burners, only to be superseded by electric power, and eventually, much later, by solar panels. Every one of these shifts was less a permanent answer than a quiet acknowledgement that the earlier model remained inadequate. And maybe that's the toughest aspect to grasp when recounting this tale. You never truly conquer the sea. The only option is endless adjustment. Those lighthouse keepers who endured lonely nights up on the granite tower weren't fearless film heroes or immune to monotony. They were regular guys pulling grueling shifts, battling the chill and isolation, and even smoking dried tea leaves once the tobacco supply was gone. Still, night after night, they made sure that light stayed lit. They understood that beyond the darkness lay entire vessels packed with families and crew members. That beam of light was their only safeguard against slamming into those very same rocks. For hundreds of years, those rocks had fueled the local economy by looting vessels that wrecked on them. The Longships Lighthouse was ultimately automated in 1988, over 100 years after the current tower had first been opened. What had long been seen as absolutely essential, a permanent human presence, was no longer required. Nowadays, the lighthouse runs autonomously, overseen from a far-off solar-powered control hub with no people anywhere around. For the bulk of the year, those granite walls sit completely deserted. In the past, the tower demanded men who would leave their loved ones behind for weeks at a stretch. They talked to their wives on shore using colored signal flags. These days, it functions on its own, silently, and with no manual intervention. The entire legacy of human sacrifice seemed like nothing more than a required phase before technology could ultimately make people unnecessary. And that's exactly where the most important takeaway from this entire tale can be found. Longships Lighthouse isn't simply a stone structure standing against the Atlantic. It's an accurate depiction of how people cope with unforgiving surroundings. It started with trial and error, followed by ever more advanced engineering methods. Time and again, it was upheld by those ready to push beyond normal limits so that others might stay alive. Every adjustment, whether wedged stones or swapping tobacco for tea leaves during a lonely storm, reveals the same fundamental insight. Staying alive isn't about ideal circumstances. It's about turning scarce resources into workable answers. From now on, seeing a distant lighthouse, you might not view it as just a pretty landmark anymore. You'll recall the men who endured weeks of solitude within those walls. Consider the wives who hoisted coded flags into the wind. Remember the ease you now enjoy with daylight, instant messaging, and being in touch with anyone globally at all times. This is a straightforward outcome of forebears who figured out how to endure even where survival looked unattainable. Should this tale change how you see the sea, tech, and human grit? Drop a comment underneath. Share which part of the trip inside Long's Lighthouse House struck you the most. Remember to hit like on the clip, since that genuinely supports the channel in delivering more genuine narratives such as this. Also, subscribe to the platform so you won't overlook our upcoming documentary. In the coming week, we'll feature the even tougher tale of the Wolf Rock Lighthouse. That structure was erected by the same designer under circumstances widely regarded as even more hopeless than at Long's Knee.